There's no photograph that can capture the experience of standing in front of the rose.
When you stand in front of this picture, there's something uncanny about this picture, about your experience of it.
It was probably the most iconic work of that period.
Jay DeFeo took 8 years of her life in commitment to a vision she had for creating this painting that has become the rose. She started without knowing exactly where it was going, but she knew that she had some idea and was willing to do whatever it took. It was not exhibited until 1969.
And after that, it was brought to the San Francisco Art Institute. DeFeo had no place to store it in her own home. She had no money to pay for a storage facility. She didn't even have studio space, really a legitimate studio space at that time.
Jay's friend, Fred Martin, who was then dean of the San Francisco Art Institute, invited her to loan the work and have it installed in a new conference room. In 1972, so this is then 3 years after the rose was installed at the Art Institute, Jay, Bruce Connor, her friend, and other people began to notice that there was some lack of care with the work. And it was decided that it should be checked out. Tony Rockwell, who was then at the San Francisco Museum Conservation Lab, did a first report.
When this temporary conservation measure was put in place, it completely obscured the front of the canvas. And the idea was that they would stabilize the surface and then bring the painting to a conservation lab where further work would be done. They covered the surface of the painting. It was filled with additives and stabilizers and plaster.
The painting became too big with the addition of the plaster to go out the way it came in.
And then after 5 years had passed and that successive stage of conservation never took place, the San Francisco Art Institute built a false wall in front of the covered painting.
In the 1970s, I was on the faculty at the Art Institute in San Francisco, and I taught a seminar in a small seminar room. And in that room, there was always this kind of rumor that behind the wall in front of which I stood, there was this legendary painting.
The work was, in essence, buried alive. I mean, it was behind this false wall. I think because of that, the mystery and the legend of the rose grew. It became something rumored, but not known and not seen.
Fast forward 20 years, and I'm the director of the Whitney, and Lisa Phillips comes to me while she's in the process of organizing the checklist and her kind of wish list for this extraordinary exhibition she did on beat culture. She said, you know, the great treasure for this show would be the rose.
It certainly was her magnus opus, and she spent so much time, energy, love working on the piece.
Lisa and Leah and I had several conversations about what it would mean to try to rescue and revive the rose. And making serious acquisitions of a serious work was exactly what we were supposed to be doing, and we did that fairly frequently. But we'd never had to acquire a work that couldn't be seen and that existed essentially as a rumor.
Everybody understood that it was important and that maybe this was the opportunity to, in fact, save this great work of art.
In early June 1995, knowing that the Beat Culture and New America show was to open in New York at the Whitney in November, the wall came down and the conservation on the work began.
Everybody thought this was a great idea. Let's try to revive, rescue, restore the rose. So we proceeded, and of course the story of its rescue, you know, getting it out of the wall, and then the amazing story of these brilliant scientists, really, I mean, no other word would suffice. So they x-rayed it and found where there were gaps with air, and they filled it with this space-age plastic of some kind by injecting it and stabilized it in all sorts of ways. A new stretcher was made again using the most modern technology to create a stretcher frame that would accommodate essentially a ton of paint.
It really was a risk. Not many museum directors and curators would necessarily choose to spend this many months and this much money working on a piece that might not exist when they remove the plaster. And so they just took this enormous leap of faith, and luckily it paid off, and I feel that the Whitney Museum, all of New York, American art history, and me personally, we've benefited from that risk ever since. At the time that she died, she had a lot of optimism that the rose would finally find a good home. I mean, it was still covered with plaster and a false wall, and it was off view and had been for many years. But I think she believed that eventually it would find a home.
I had come from a meeting where I had discussed the possibility of an interest in conservation, and I was telling her about it, and I could see that she was tired and not feeling well. And I remember saying to her, let's talk about this tomorrow. And she said, oh no, I'm listening to every word you're saying, but right above your head, I see this scenario. And I said, what's that, Jay? And she said, I'm in another life, and I'm walking in a museum, and I come upon the rose, and I see someone looking at it, and I walk up to them and nudge them and say, I did that. She knew this would happen, that takes some of the bitter out of the bittersweet of having all of this success when she didn't literally see it. She told me she saw it.